I think it's fascinating that Ferdowsi,
Hmm.
this was, the post-Islamization of Persia.
Hmm.
He decided to
Hmm.
compile the Book of Kings, the Shahnameh, and
Sure.
it collects the myths and the stories of old
Hmm.
Iran. And it took him, I think, about like 30 to 35 years or so. Do we know how long it took Snorri Sturluson to compose the prose and the poetic?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I don't think we do know exactly because the thing is that we do know relatively little about Snorri's life, I have to say. We do have details of what he did and what he was, but we do have very little details, I would say. But no, I wouldn't know how long it would have taken him, but it seems at least to have been, over a long period of time. Whether he did it full time, is another question. Maybe it's something that he did over time and because it seems that he was also very interested in what we could refer to as antiquarianism, like he was interested in the old history. So it's clearly, he was not only interested in his own, again, in the history of the in of Norse mythology, but he was also interested in the history of kings. He's also attributed the authorship of what's called the Heimskringla, which is this collection of the histories of the kings of Norway. So he also has attributed this text. So it seems that he was very much interested in this in this history of his own culture, you can say, but he's Icelandic, but certainly about the older times in Norway as well, right? Or before the settlement of Iceland and into the settlement of Iceland eventually. But no, he was certainly interested in the antiquarianism. So it seems that it was a big part of his life to collect the stories and then compile them. But I wouldn't be able to tell you how long it would taken him to do it. And one other thing that we have to keep in mind with Snorri, because sometimes Snorri is presented as this person who was just interested in mythology and he was interested in perhaps preserving the mythology. But he had other purposes to write the Edda, really. And because he was very interested in poetry, that was his main issue. His main interest is poetry. He was very interested in poetry. But poetry, like Old Norse poetry especially, has this literary literary device called kenning. So a kenning is this literary device that is used in poetry to refer to something by making similes, right? So the idea of like, the tree of battle, for example, is a man. Just instead of saying man, you say tree of battle, for example. So there's a lot of this of this and this of that. Um, and so a lot of those kennings made references to mythology. So they would have said, the fire of Fafnir, whatever, that means gold, right? But
That's a good
if you
one.
are not familiar
Those
with
are
the
both good
mythology,
ones.
the whole story, the whole poetry falls apart because you have no idea what they're talking about,
Yeah.
right?
It's like a secret code.
So it is almost, right?
Yeah.
But of course, the suggestion is that people who were pagan before, before the Christianization, they would have known these stories anyway. They know what they're talking about. But that got lost over time with Christianization. So it seems that what Snorri was trying to do here, and certainly that was the purpose of the Prose Edda, is that he was trying to preserve these details for him to understand, or for not for others to understand the poetry. Right?
Mm.
It was a way of an educational book. It was a school book essentially, right? Because
Wow.
if you look at other parts of the Edda, yes, we do sort of focus on the first part about mythology, but then the second part of the book is actually about poetic meters. It's going technically into poetic meter. You need to have this much syllables, and you have to do this. So it's clearly a book about poetry more than it is a book about mythology. The mythology is just needed for you to understand or compose new ones if you want to compose new poems, so that you can sort of use these ideas and understand what they're referring to when they're making this very obscure reference to some goddess or some god somewhere. You have to know the story of why that is there. So that's
Absolutely.
one thing that needs to be, I think, kept in mind that, he was doing it for a purpose, not just for the love of it.
That's insightful. Thanks for sharing that.